Welcome to MCN, welcome to our lightweight adventure bike test. Now, the adventure bike class has just grown exponentially over the years, but there's a whole category, these lightweight bikes, which really are capturing people's imagination because they're delivering a much easier rider experience, a much more user-friendly rider experience. So, starting with the cheapest bike, we have the Royal Enfield Himalayan, which comes in at £5,049. It's a user-friendly bike, aimed at beginners, aimed at people just wanting to get out there. It's kind of like a do-it-all bike that's got a certain amount of charm about it. Next up is the BMW 310 GS. So this is 5890, so it's significantly more expensive, but obviously wears that BMW badge, slightly more road focused, but still capable for on and off-road trails. Next up is the Honda CRF 300 Rally. Comes in another price jump, so 6,499. It's very much the most off-road focused bike here in terms of the spec, the suspension travel, the wheel sizes. That's the one if you want to be going some serious off-road. Next up is the most expensive bike here, which is the KTM 390 Adventure. 6,699. It is without doubt the most sophisticated motorcycle here in terms of the spec, in terms of the electronics, and it's just whether that can really be the sort of do-it-all bike that we'll all be looking for. So, to understand where these bikes are good, where they're not, we've come to Devon, which is an incredible place to ride. Beautiful scenery, beautiful roads, and lots of off-road. So the idea over the next couple of days is we're going to use these bikes up against each other in all these environments to really try and understand what's good and what isn't so good.
This MCN video has been produced in partnership with Bikesure Insurance.
Right, so we've been riding these bikes predominantly on the road today, and that's been fast terrain roads right through to some incredible, beautiful lanes that you really do only get in Devon. So joining me is Nathan. Nathan, you know these bikes very well. You run days out on all these bikes, these sort of A2 licensed bikes, so you've got a lot of experience. So just focus on the road for now. How do you kind of rate them? What do you think's sort of good? What do you think's not?
I think a clear winner, if you're going to pick the best road bike today on the road, is a 390 KTM.
Yep.
I think performance, 43 horsepower, and that great WP Apex suspension just means you can ride it quite aggressively, and it rewards that aggression. I mean, for me, it's really highlighted today riding a faster pace than I would normally do, just how lackluster that becomes as the pace increases. It just can't cope. The chassis, the suspension becomes so overwhelmed as soon as the pace increases. So I don't want to say there's one better or one worse. So what I would say is the KTM clearly suits a more aggressive rider who likes to push on. The GS for me is a better bike, or as good a bike when you're backing off and riding 5/10. I think what I've found from feedback on the KTM is some people love it initially, and then they tire of it because it asks a lot of them as a rider. And actually the KTM is less refined on these kind of back roads where you're dawdling, whereas the GS offers a more refined, relaxed, docile ride than the KTM.
But that's KTM's say, isn't it? They want you to go.
But I think fundamentally KTM have done a better job with that than BMW have done with that, haven't they? You know, the engine's stronger, the handling's better, there's more potential in that, there's more room for excitement. That I think you buy it just because it does a job, but it's not going to ever
definitely
do
puts
too
a
much.
smile on your face, and it's the only one you can be at sort of 60, 65 miles an hour and accelerate, and it actually goes, rather than these are all kind of labouring at that speed. So I think one of the gripes with the BMW, which we both found, is suspension. It's like you described it great about.
You're sort of going into a corner aggressively and you're starting to brake, and the bike starts to just bob, and you almost like have to let it stop bobbing and then turn it in, because if you try and turn in as it's bobbing, it's just all over the place. And if you're riding at a slower pace, you don't feel that, and actually it's quite, it absorbs bumps quite well. You know, it does the bumps absorption pretty good until you start going beyond a certain speed, and then it just goes,
yeah,
and then it's too soft.
yeah. I thought the brakes are wooden on that as well. They just didn't really give you any sort of confidence in the front, especially. Didn't particularly like that. And even though it has got slightly more horsepower than the Honda and the Himalayan,
It didn't get away, did it?
you don't feel it,
No.
and you have to really sort of wring its neck to get that, which it doesn't feel particularly happy or comfortable doing. So, yeah, not that great.
It revs to 10,000 RPM, which is a lot for a single, and it's where it needs to be to get anything out of it.
Yeah, but it's not particularly pleasant doing that.
No, and I think just on the torque of suspension, I think it just shows that BMW probably did undercut it a little bit. There's no linkage in the rear, and there's only one fork that's doing any work. There's only a spring in one leg.
Yeah.
So you can tell BMW have gone, right, we've got to build the bike for this price. What's going to suffer? Suspension.
Yeah.
And I think riding it, you go, you
Yeah.
know, actually, it really does show where they've cut corners.
So moving on, the Honda. Obviously, it's a very different bike. It's clearly much more off-road focused. 21-inch front wheel, a lot more suspension travel, a lot softer suspension. But what do you make of the handling on that to start with?
I mean, initially it's woeful, isn't it? You get on it after the rest, and it's almost death-defying. You go into a corner and it just flops. It almost drops off a cliff into a corner.
And that's going to be partly tyres, and partly that 21-inch front, and you're just crashing through the stroke of the suspension as soon as you put any sort of load on it.
It's not ideal, but I think you do, after you've done some miles on it, you adjust to it, and
Yes.
and you actually think, oh, it's okay.
Yeah.
It's just, and I think we've got to remember, this is the only trail bike here. Honda built this as a trail bike.
Yeah.
None of the others built trail bikes.
Yeah, so we've got to be a little bit
Soft on it on the road.
Yeah.
And I think that's what we've just said. Like, we forgive the Honda some bad manners on the road because it's going to be good on the trails. We struggle to give leniency to the GS because
it should be a road bike.
Yeah, it should be good on the road because it's not. I don't want to, preempt things, but it's not great off road and it's not great on road.
Yeah.
So, whereas this at least is off road capable.
Yeah.
So we can forgive it that. And I think Itchy Boots has proven that on the road it will do a big trip.
Yes.
Because there are people out there travelling on them. Yes, they compromise. Yes, you've got to do something to the seat to make it better. And as soon as you put luggage on, you need a big, a stiffer shock.
Yeah.
So there's things you have to do to make this good on the road, but ultimately it will do it.
So the Himalayan,
the
so bike close to your heart. First time I'd ridden one.
Yep.
So I must admit I jumped on it and I was pleasantly surprised because I sort of thought it put a smile on my face. It felt relaxed, it felt comfortable, it felt slow steering. Everything's
A pair of slippers.
yeah, and you could push on to the same degree as either of these bikes, no problem. And there were times when I was expecting that to just drop it. Look, you could drop it easily on that if you put your mind to it. But I thought the faster I rode it, the more I didn't like it.
Okay.
Sort of a mediocre pace, it's a lovely place to be. But the moment you start to sort of rev it more, it gets quite, not vibey, but rattly.
Yeah.
And it doesn't, it's a long stroke motor, whereas these other bikes obviously a shorter stroke motor.
Yeah.
So it doesn't want to rev as much.
No.
But you've obviously done some big miles on these
I've
things.
done across America and Eastern Europe and Ireland and Scotland on it. I have a natural affinity to it because I bought one when they first came out and I've done a lot of miles and I've dealt with all the criticisms of it. And for me, it works as a road bike because it's a comfortable place to be. It's relaxing.
Yep.
It has got that long stroke motor, so it's got more torque than these two.
Yep.
The suspensions, it's not got as much travel as the CRF, but it's got a bit more than these two.
But it's actually quite supported, isn't it?
It is. And it's a Harris design frame. And I've been in situations where you're hustling that bike with against faster bikes, and it holds its own because it gives me a lot of confidence. It's not a fast turning bike, but you put it into a corner and you pitch it, and nothing is going to move that bike out of that line. It's a stable.
But the weight's low, The weight's really low on that.
Yeah, and I guess it depends when we say best for the road. I guess it depends what you're going to do. If you're going to do a lot of fast-paced commuting, no. If you're going to go travelling on it, there's elements of that really work on the road.
Yeah.
Like we talk, centre stand, side racks, rear rack.
Yeah.
Those are factors that come into, not necessarily into play today, but if you went away for a week on it, 2 weeks, 3 weeks,
You
the
would
centre
start to
stand is
benefit.
like more valuable than 10 horsepower.
Yeah.
You know, so it depends what kind of road riding you're going to do, but I can understand why it would be underwhelming to some people in this environment where you're trying to pick a winner based on maybe its performance. It's never going to win on performance.
No, but in terms of the place to be and the experience and whether you've got a smile on your face, which ultimately this is what, this is all about.
But, you know, today, clearly on the road, KTM.
Yeah.
No brainer, isn't it?
No.
It's exciting, it's fast, it handles well.
Yeah.
You know, it charges through corners.
Yeah, it does. And you've got it in the power, you've got the power in your hand, it's off.
You know, would you go any faster on any other bike? Me as a rider, no.
No,
No,
you're starting to take risks, I think,
Yeah,
if you're
yeah,
going
yeah,
much faster.
yeah.
So I hope that's given you a bit of an indication of what we like, what we don't like, and some genuine real-world experience from Nathan, who's done a lot of miles from all these bikes, particularly the Himalayan. So thank you very much, Nathan.
It's all right, my pleasure.
Right, so we've had a fantastic day of off-road riding. We've been blessed by the weather and we've done some river crossings, which were quite challenging. We've had some quite sort of muddy trails, wet trails, and now on this lane here, which is not only amazing, amazing views, but kind of nice because you can go a little bit faster on it. So I feel like we've done a pretty good test of the bikes and how they behave in sort of more technical terrain through to more sort of hard pack riding. So with Nathan again here, obviously knows these bikes very well, has done a lot of these trails. This is his backyard, does a lot of tours and stuff around this area, so he's taken us on some of his favourites. So Nathan, starting with the KTM, what do you think, what's your general impression of that bike, and where do you think it's kind of, what's your feeling initially? What do you feel about it?
I think, yes, as we said yesterday with regards its road riding, it's a road bike. It's a road-derived adventure bike. So it's always going to compromise it. And I think the 390 suffered in its early days when it was launched. People were like, you built as an adventure bike, but it's effectively a road bike with road bike geometry.
Yep.
And you've dressed it up as an adventure bike, therefore it's not a proper thing.
Yep.
And it's certainly not a trail bike. I think the 19-inch front wheel, I know they've given us spoke wheels now, but it was cast aluminium wheels originally.
Yep.
So nothing about the bike when it came out shouted adventure trail.
And spoke wheels in themselves doesn't
it's not,
completely change the way the bike is.
Yeah, no, aesthetically the spoke wheels are going to add a bit of kudos to it, and that's probably why we're talking about it now. I mean, do they benefit the bike from a riding position? Well, it's not going to make a difference how it rides. It's going to make it less easy to repair a trail puncture. So are we going for spokes for aesthetic reasons? Probably, probably so. I mean, obviously the fundamentals of the bike haven't changed, and it's a shame that they've not changed. Probably what is the biggest complaint about the 390 is the peg position with it canted forwards.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a shame because it's an easy solution from the aftermarket. I've got SW Motec angle pegs on mine, and it cures it straight away.
Right.
Roll the bars forward, and you've got a far more relaxed riding position.
Yeah,
for
because
this
you
type.
do feel, you
like
really
that.
feel over the top of it. Even, we're not the tallest riders, so, a 6-foot rider would really kind of struggle with
Yeah, and I think it's fine if you're in attack mode and you're really going at a trail and making the most of the suspension, but when you're in a sat-back travel, say it's travel trail ride, say you went to Morocco or something and you did a 20-kilometre piece or 30-kilometre piece, I think after 5 kilometres your neck would be sore, everything would be sore because there's nothing natural about how you stand on it, which for me makes it, it's a road bike that you can go off-road, but it's not an off-road bike.
Yeah.
And I think for anybody who's looking at one of these bikes to go off-road, it shines on the road magnificently. It's a brilliant road bike.
Yeah.
And that ultimately means it's not as great off-road as, say, the CRF, but that was designed to be an off-road bike. So you're kind of comparing apples and, I guess, apples and oranges.
Yeah.
I think what we've found, the technology involved can be a bit intrusive. The traction control for Euro 5, they meant to make it so you could turn traction control off and it would stay off even when you stored it or killed the ignition. We don't seem to be making...
No.
It seems to still be reactivating every time you stall it, which if you're a novice rider and you're stalling it a lot, which you do as a novice rider, and you've got to keep deactivating the traction control, which is a faff, I think you're just going to get really frustrated by that bike. So to me, this without all the electronic intrusion would be a better bike.
I agree, because you've also got to question how much you need traction control on a 42 brake horsepower motorbike with a reasonably soft power delivery. I think things I'd like to add there, I think, like you've touched on it, the suspension, because it is just another world in terms of the spec of these bikes, the quality of it. That shines through on the road, and it does also shine through off-road.
Yeah.
Because even with the smaller front wheel, you know, this sort of terrain, when you've got a chance of getting a bit of a head shake on, it does just deal with it very, very well. I completely agree, the technology, and we've also had a few issues with the bike cutting out on us, and we're not stalling it, it's cutting out. My theory is maybe the side stand is activating when it's in gear. You're hitting a bump and it's dropping down and activating. It is very easy to put down, isn't it? The side stand. So that could be one of the factors in that. But yeah, I completely agree. I think I think some of its shortcomings are essentially masked by its road bias is masked by the fact that it's got good suspension, and you can get away with quite a lot off-road.
And I think that means it's a shame that KTM didn't go more into it and build an R version, because there is great. The engine's fantastic. The engine works off-road. It likes to be on throttle. It's not a chugger. It likes to be on throttle. The suspension's good, but ergonomically, they've not gone as far as they needed to make it maybe the bike that we want it to be, but maybe the bike that they know would never sell. I mean, maybe their key market for a bike like this is probably India and the developing markets where people sit down to ride off-road. So then, you know, the average Indian rider's probably not griping like we are that you can't stand up on it because they sit down on it. So, you know, we're maybe expecting too much from KTM, and maybe we just have to accept it as a great road bike that can do off-road, but it's not its natural. Maybe it's not its natural terrain. So, right, so the Himalayan. Back on target. So again, bike you've done an awful lot on. What for you makes it a great trail bike? I think it's user friendly. You know, when I've had people, so I own a fleet of these exact bikes, and I take people out to ride these bikes back to back like we have, and a lot of them have never been off-road. So they're looking at it from a different perspective to maybe what we're looking for. I think what the Himalayan always gives the novice rider is stability, sure-footedness, and just that sense that as long as they point it in the right direction, the bike's going to get them up the hill. They're hard to stall, they've got a good chug factor. The brakes don't work great on the road, but that means they're not going to bite heavy on the off-road. The standing position, it's got a very flared midsection, which bends your knees out. But where we said if you went to Morocco and this, you get uncomfortable on a 30-kilometre trail, I think I can ride these off-road all day long because the stance is just, you just sit on it, and it's, I think where you've found it and where I find it limiting is when you start to push on.
Yeah, exactly.
And then you have to remember that when it came out, it was $4,000. They built it for the Indian market as an all-road bike, not as a trail bike. It was built for all the roads of India, which are paved. You know, this is in some parts of India, this is a main road.
Yes.
So I think for me, it has got its limitations, but at the bottom end of the market where maybe these bikes are pitched at, it does suit a lot of riders. I mean, the weight is it's slightly heavy weight, but for me, the weight sits very low. It sits between your feet. For me, the weight. You notice it when you're manoeuvring the bike, but when you're actually riding it, you don't really feel it. I mean, I think echoing what you said, it's a friendly, it's an easy place to be. My only criticism is the times when you have started to ride it a bit faster. It's exactly the same as on the road. It's like you can quite quickly get out of its comfort zone. And then it doesn't sort of handle, even though it's got the bigger front wheel, it still feels a little bit sort of stability. I think that's why I'd always say this is a great travel bike. And I've always, you know, people might laugh, but I'd say it's one of the best travel bikes of the last few years because it travels well, which is different to trailing well. You know, a trail, when you're off-road, traveling around the world, for example, you're not wanting dynamic performance. You're wanting something that gets you through the mud and the sludge with security. I mean, people slate it because it's got poor ground clearance and all that, but that means it's got a low seat height. You know, and low seat height counts a lot when you're a novice rider off-road, and you could just, I'm going to fall over, I'm going to put my feet down. That counts a lot. So I think it's Marmite. You know, it's pure Marmite, and you either get it or it appeals to you or it doesn't. And I think that's perfect. There's people buy these, do 500 miles and sell them. There's people who do 30,000, 40,000 miles on them and keep them. And will never sell them, You know, so you either love it or hate it, I think. But that's all bikes, isn't it, really? CRF then. Moving on to CRF. So, you know, on the outset, it's clearly the most off-road focus here. You can tell a lot by what tyres are fitted as standard. You can see by the styling, you know, it's obviously designed to replicate a rally bike. It's obviously not a rally bike, but, you know, that's the idea. Very, very popular for this sort of riding. Very much so. What do you make of this? What's your experience with it? I can't help but say I'm always slightly underwhelmed by the CRF. I own a lot of Hondas.
Yeah.
You know, I've got 15 Hondas, so I can't say I've got anything against the brand, but I think we had so many great bikes through the 90s and 2000s that I just think they're a bit capable of building something a little bit better than that. And that's not to say it's a bad bike, but a bit like the BMW, the badge comes with expectations.
Yes.
The beauty of the Royal Enfield, it got no expectation. Nobody expected anything out of this. But the Honda's got, you've got expectations. So that suspension, and you're trying to puzzle yourself, well, why have they made it so soft? Well, that's to compromise the fact that they wanted to put a tall seat height. And you just think, there's questions there. Why do I have to buy a bike and then improve the suspension? That's not right. That's
because it's not £100 fix. That's the problem.
It's not.
It's hundreds of pounds fix.
And I do like it, and I see why people like it. And certainly for off-roading the L, it just makes perfect sense to get rid of all the plastics that are, vulnerable. And I think the question with the CRF is, yes, it is good on road, off-road, sorry. How good is it on road? And I think that's been interesting for me today, or this last few days, to see that actually that keeps up with these bikes on the road pretty well, doesn't it? So it's not as good as it could be. No. I think it could have been better, but it is still a good bike. Yeah. Which I know is a bit wishy-washy, but that's probably where I'm at with it.
I mean, I think, if you had to do some technical riding right now, this would be the bike I'd take.
Yes.
It's a 21-inch front wheel, it's that narrower profile, and that makes a big difference, not so much on this ground, but if it's muddy and slippery, you just sort of cut through stuff a lot better. The suspension is soft, but on the river crossings we did earlier, I didn't mind that soft suspension because you kind of know where you are, you're not really loading, you're not trying to go fast, so it sort of soaks it up, and you also know that you can have a dab if you need to, which is, even though it has got quite a tall seat height. I know what you mean about it. I was going to buy one of these. I really was I thought that's the answer. That's going to work, but I'm the same. It's a friendly bike, it's an enjoyable bike to ride, but you do just feel like it, with a bit more effort, and it's not cheap anymore either.
No.
It could be better. It's probably the bike that people out there who are spending a lot of money on. That's what we should have got in the first place from a suspension point of view.
And I think what probably highlights it more is that the fact that 450L came out and probably disappointed a lot of people. We expected a slightly bigger, capable long distance travel bike, trail bike, and what we got was bloody a enduro bike.
Yeah.
So I think you're right what you say. The suspension, it is very soft, but it does enable the novice rider or when you're in sticky situations to get away with it. So I think there's this clamour to change the suspension immediately, and I think it's definitely a case of just ride it, see how you get on with it, progress with it, and then improve.
But it's only when you're starting to jump the thing or ride real quick, where if you get in a sequence of bumps where the suspension just sort of starts falling through the stroke, and then you run out of everything and it all gets a bit...
It's just that initial feeling that it feels like you've got a flat back tyre, because it just sits flat and it almost, it's like dragging its back end. It's weird, but you do get used to it.
So the BMW 310 GS, again, you know this, but you own one, I believe.
I own one, yeah. I think it's easy to be critical of the GS, and I think equally it's easy to be critical maybe the Himalayan and maybe all these bikes, because they're not perfection. Yep. And the GS is far from perfection, and it's almost, I don't want to, it might sound hard, but it's undeserving of the GS badge, because the GS means so much. The incredible bikes, the 11s and the 1150s, the 12s, the 1250s, and I guess they just wanted to build something that aped that, but on a budget. And I think the budget element shows through, but to me it only starts to show through when you push on a lot. So I do think there's a place for that bike, and the place for that bike is for a rider who's not going to ride fast, who's not going to push it off-road, who's not going to push it on-road, who just wants a sedate, reliable, comfortable, easy to ride machine, which is what a lot of people want. But as soon as you get above 6/10, it just falls to pieces.
And they also want the GS. They want I've got a BMW GS. I completely agree. It was the bike. So on this trail in particular, that was the bike that I felt most nervous of.
It
just felt like like we had it on the road. When you were starting to go quicker, it never really settling into the corner before you actually, where you wanted it to feel all planted and secure. It was still sort of, I wonder what we're going to do. And it's exactly the same there. This is the only bike I came down there. I had a little moment on the Himalayan, but it just felt like I could it could easily, start swapping out on
yeah.
you and you being a lot of
And
trouble.
again, you say, well, that's okay, it's a beginner's bike, but a beginner doesn't want a bike that's going to make them feel nervous on trail. So it sort of doesn't do the novice rider any good.
No.
I mean, if you're a novice rider going very slow, they're not going to notice it. But as soon as a novice rider starts to progress the riding, they're really the bike's going to hold them back. Which I think actually, out of the two bikes at the end, if I were going to put suspension on one of them, it'd be on the GS.
Yeah.
Because I think somewhere there's a German engineer who's incredibly frustrated that his baby GS, which had the potential to actually be pretty good, the corporate machine forced it to ditch its rear linkage and put a shock only in one of its forks, etc. So there's potential there in that bike, but I guess price brings it, it cuts all the good stuff out a little bit.
But I think it's quite telling what tyres have been put on as an OE bike, and the fact that you can't turn ABS off. And I think that straight away gives a very clear indication of what BMW are expecting from this motorbike. And who they're aiming at. Nathan, that's great insight and an opinion on it. I think we're pretty much on the same wavelength with all these bikes, but it's interesting getting your take on it with how your customers respond to each individual of these bikes, because not everyone out there is going to ride like you and I, or with Ollie or with Gareth, that have also been on this test. So
what I've found is there's a rider for every bike. Somebody will get off one bike and say something that you completely can't understand and fathom, but in their minds that's right. There's no right and there's no wrong, and I think it's the importance of a test ride.
Yes.
Because all these four bikes are so different in their personalities.
Yes.
They're coming at it from a completely different market. I think the only way is to get a ride on it and ask yourself what you're going to do with the bike. Am I going to go off-road all day, every day? It's natural, buy a CRF. Do I want some fast, entertaining road work with occasional bit of off-road?
KTM.
If you're not bothered, you just want a bit of transport, GS is great. And if I'm going around the world tomorrow, I'd take the Himalayan. So each bike's got its place, and it's just you as a rider deciding what you need from the bike, and then actually the decision becomes quite simple, straightforward. I would say.
Brilliant. Thank you, Nathan. Great stuff. So if you've enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe. These are the bikes we've tested. These are the ones we've enjoyed, but let us know what you think in the comments below.
This MCM video has been produced in partnership with Bike Shore Insurance.